Let me tell you about the worst night of my life. I was 24 years old, standing at the bar, in the kind of shirt that cost more than my rent, which tells you two things. One, I was trying very hard, and two, I was very bad at managing money. I had spent 3 weeks reading every book I could find about how to talk to women. I had memorized lines. I had rehearsed body language in my bathroom mirror. I watched videos about alpha positioning until 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was armed. I was ready. I was, and I say this with no exaggeration, a complete disaster. The woman I approached that night was smart, funny, beautiful, and within about 40 seconds, she could tell that everything coming out of my mouth was a performance. Not because she was perceptive, though she was. Because performances are easy to detect. We have spent our entire evolutionary history learning to detect them. The moment something feels rehearsed, something in us pulls back. The warmth drains out of the room. Her eyes went from interested to polite, which is the dating equivalent of someone slowly backing toward the exit while still smiling. I went home that night and sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling for a while. What was I doing wrong? I had all the tactics. I had the lines. I had the walk and the talk and the strategically unbuttoned shirt collar. I had everything I'd been told I needed, and none of it worked. Not because the woman was impossible or difficult or not the right type, because I was a 24-year-old in a costume pretending to be a man who had it together, and the costume was visible from space. That was the beginning of something, because that failure sent me on a completely different path. A path that led me away from tactics and towards something much more interesting, much more powerful, and genuinely more useful than anything in those books. What I want to share with you today isn't a collection of lines or moves or psychological tricks. It is a way of understanding what attraction actually is, what creates it, what kills it, what sustains it, drawn from some of the sharpest minds who have ever studied this subject. The following insights help me approach women differently, and I believe they will change how you see yourself, how you see the people you are attracted to, and what you actually do about it. Let's start at a hotel in Paris. The man at the hotel. When Robert Greene was 21 years old, he worked at a hotel in Paris, the kind of hotel where models stayed, which means it was also the kind of hotel where men came specifically because models stayed there. And among those men was someone who stood out in a way Greene could not initially explain. His name was Eduardo. He was a tall Brazilian man, reasonably good-looking, not the most handsome person in the room, not the wealthiest, not the loudest, not the most expensively dressed. By every conventional metric of what we think attraction is supposed to look like, Eduardo should have been unremarkable. And yet women at this hotel, accomplished, beautiful, experienced women who had been pursued by people with considerably more obvious credentials, absolutely melted around him. Greene watched this. He studied it. He became briefly friends with Eduardo, partly out of professional curiosity and partly, I suspect, out of the kind of low-key desperation that all of us have felt when someone else seems to have decoded something we cannot figure out. And what he discovered was this: Eduardo was not doing anything. That was the whole secret. He was not performing. He was not running game. He was not thinking about what he needed to say next, or how he was coming across, or whether his shirt was working. He was not in his own head at all. He was entirely, completely, effortlessly focused on whoever he was talking to. Not because he had trained himself to appear that way, because he genuinely was that way. He had no defensiveness. No insecurity pulling his attention back toward himself. He was so undefensive, so unhurried, so genuinely curious about the woman in front of him, that being around him felt like standing in sunlight. Greene described it as calmness, relaxation, an absence of the usual anxiety that men carry into these situations, like uncomfortable luggage. And that absence, that negative space where ego and performance and desperation were supposed to live, created something extraordinary. It created magnetism. Now, here is the uncomfortable thing about that story, because the first response most men have when they hear it is, "Great, so I just need to be calm and focused." And they immediately start trying to perform, being calm, which is, as you can probably see, exactly the opposite of what Eduardo was doing. This is the central paradox of attraction. The qualities that create it cannot be faked, they can only be built. And building them requires understanding something that most conversations about dating never actually address: what seduction really is, at its core. The language without words. Seduction, real seduction, not the pickup artist kind, is a language. But it is almost entirely a language without words. Think about what it actually communicates. When you take someone to a particular place, you're saying something without speaking. When you remember something they mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago and bring it up again naturally in conversation, you're saying something. When you are genuinely still and present with someone in a world that is constantly demanding attention elsewhere, you are saying something so loud that it cuts through everything. What are you saying? You are saying, "You matter to me." Not in the desperate, needy way that pushes people away, but in the most powerful possible way. I was paying attention when you spoke. I carried what you said with me. I see you. Here is a concrete example of this. 2 men take the same woman on a date. The first man spends $200. He takes her to a beautiful restaurant, orders expensive wine, and at the end of the evening gives her flowers, nice flowers, from a proper florist. The second man spends $12. He takes her for a walk in a part of the city that, in passing conversation a month ago, she mentioned she had never been to but always wanted to see. And he brings her a small, cheap paperback of a book she had mentioned she'd been meaning to read since she was 15. Which gift is more seductive? It is not a close contest. The $12 gift says, "I heard you. I remembered. I thought about you when you weren't there." It reveals something that money cannot buy and tactics cannot replicate: genuine attention, real interest. The kind of noticing that has become so rare in a world of half-listening, phone-checking, ambient social media distraction that when someone actually does it, it feels almost shocking. People don't listen anymore. Not really. They hear words, sure, but they don't absorb, they don't carry, they don't bring things back. They don't sit with what someone tells them and let it settle and come back to it hours later from a different angle and say, "You know, that thing you said earlier about your mother's garden, I keep thinking about it." When you do that, something happens. Something that bypasses every defense and every wall and every strategy a person might have. Because it is not a tactic. There is no defense against someone actually listening to you, because most of us have stopped expecting it. It catches us off guard every single time. Now, and this is important, there is a version of this that is performed and a version that is real, and they look completely different. There are people who have read about the power of silence and presence, and have therefore decided to deploy silence as a tactic. You will recognize them. They sit across from you, with a carefully composed expression of thoughtful interest. They nod in a very deliberate way. They pause before speaking with the precision of a man who has read that pausing is attractive. And something about it feels wrong, and you cannot name why. Here is why. The nod is a byproduct of processing something. When your brain is genuinely engaging with what someone is telling you, when you are really turning it over and following where it goes, your head nods because your body is participating in real-time understanding. The pause before speaking exists because you are actually thinking about what to say. These are not techniques, they are symptoms of genuine engagement. And when someone performs the symptoms without the underlying cause, it lands like a cover band at a wedding. You can tell it is not the real thing. You do not know why, but you can tell. The man who listens to impress is less attractive than the man who is simply genuinely interested. Full stop. No exception. And there is one more anti-seductive quality worth lingering on here, because it is epidemic in the male population. People who talk too much, men who explain, men who have a story, and then another story, and then a counterpoint to your story, and then a correction of something you said earlier, and then an anecdote about something loosely related to your anecdote. Men who leave a conversation and feel it went well because they talked about themselves for most of it. Women call this mansplaining, but the label undersells the problem. This is not about condescension. This is about a man who is so locked inside his own head, so focused on how he is coming across and what he needs to say next, that he has fundamentally missed the entire conversation. He walked into a language and only learned to broadcast, never to receive, and you cannot seduce someone you are not actually receiving. The anti-seductive person has no self-awareness. They move through the world without looking in a mirror. They say what they want to say without noticing what they're doing to the room. They think they're being natural, which is a beautiful word for oblivious. The seductive person is not performing self-awareness. They just have it. They notice. They adjust. They read the room because they are inside the room, not narrating it from outside. 3 questions that reveal everything. Now I want to give you something practical. 3 questions. Each one of them is a different kind of X-ray. Each one reveals something different about the person sitting across from you. And each one, when used correctly, is deeply attractive. Not because they are tricks, because genuine curiosity is among the most seductive qualities a human being can display. The first question. You are in a bar, a party, a social situation with some density of people. You are talking to a woman you have just met or someone you know but want to know better. At some point you say, "You seem like someone who can read people. Just looking around. How do you tell who's real and who's putting on a show?" That is it. That is the question. What happens next is remarkable, because almost no one can resist this question. It activates something primal. We are all, constantly, running assessments of the people around us. We notice things. We form judgments. We have little theories. And almost no one ever asks us to share them. So when someone does, especially in the middle of a social gathering, the response is almost always the same. They light up. They lean in. They say, "Okay, come here." And they start scanning the room and pointing and whispering and sharing these tiny, brilliant observations they have been sitting on all night. And 2 things are happening simultaneously. 1, you are getting an education. People will tell you things from this question that you have never considered, the patterns they notice, the tells they watch for, the behaviors that seem one thing from a distance and reveal themselves to be something entirely different up close. It is genuinely interesting, endlessly interesting. 2, they are revealing themselves, because the way someone talks about others tells you almost everything about how they operate internally. The person who immediately goes for cruelty, who tears everyone apart with a kind of relish, who has nothing interesting to say but plenty of contempt, that is a window. The person who notices with warmth, who sees the insecurity beneath someone's performance without enjoying it, who has genuine empathy for why people construct the faces they show the world, that is a different window entirely. It is the best pickup line anyone has ever heard, not because it is clever, because it is real. The second question. This one requires timing and confidence. You are mid-conversation. The energy is already easy. There is already some lightness. You look at her with a completely straight face and you ask, "Do you fart?" You have to be a particular kind of comfortable in your own skin to pull this off. But if you are, and this is not a tactic, this is a byproduct of being genuinely at ease, it does something spectacular. Because every possible response to that question is revealing. If she dissolves into genuine laughter, you have found someone who does not take herself too seriously, which is among the rarest and most valuable qualities on earth. If she gets flustered and offended, you have found someone whose sense of self is so carefully managed that anything unpolished threatens it. If she fires something back, only during your explanations, then you have found someone exceptional and you should probably marry her. The point is not the fart. The point is that authenticity is the thing you are actually looking for, and inauthenticity is the thing that will poison every relationship you ever try to build. Because if you cannot be slightly ridiculous together, if there is no moment of mutual absurdity, if everything must remain curated and performed and Instagram ready, then you are not in a relationship. You are in a photo shoot. The degree of artificiality someone is comfortable with is the single most important data point when choosing a partner. Not looks, not ambition, not shared interests. All of those things matter. But all of them erode if the person has built their identity around performance rather than reality. If their dopamine comes from likes on a screen. If the background of their videos is pristine, but the rest of the house looks like a raccoon broke in and had a disagreement with a filing cabinet, that person is living inside a simulation. And you will never actually reach them, because the person you'd be reaching is the costume, not the human inside it. The third question. This one is quieter, more serious, but it is the most powerful of the 3. At some point in conversation, not the first date, but once there is some history, you ask, what's the biggest thing you learned about yourself during that time? That time being whatever difficult period has come up, a demanding job, a past relationship, a period of conflict or loss or transition, whatever stressful chapter their life has contained. The answer to this question is a complete biography. And the fascinating thing is that the answers fall into two very distinct categories, almost without exception. From a narcissist or someone with serious emotional blind spots, the answer will be about the world. I learned not to trust people so quickly. I learned that people can't be relied on. I learned that no matter what you do, you get hurt. Everything they learned about the unreliability and cruelty of other people. They emerged from a difficult chapter with their self-image entirely intact and everyone else's somewhat dented. Nothing was wrong with them. They didn't need to grow or develop or examine their own contribution to anything. Other people failed them. That is the story. That is all the story. From someone with genuine self-awareness and emotional health, the answer sounds completely different. I learned that I was more controlling than I realized. I learned that I close off when I feel vulnerable, which creates the exact distance I'm afraid of. I learned that I had spent 20 years doing something I thought was expected of me, rather than something I actually wanted. These are not comfortable admissions. They require looking inward and finding things that are difficult to see, which is why they are so rare and so attractive. Because someone who can examine themselves honestly, not as a performance of humility, not to seem self-aware, but because they genuinely did the work of looking, is someone capable of real intimacy. Someone who cannot do this will eventually make every problem between you someone else's fault, and you will spend years wondering what happened. 3 questions. More information than most people gather in months of dating. The toilet paper bicep. Now we need to talk about the thing that almost every man starts with when he becomes interested in this subject, and the thing that almost every man, eventually, has to leave behind. Tactics. There was a mentor who told someone this: flip to a random page in that pickup book and show me how it isn't a way to fake like you're a real man. The person who was told this took the challenge confidently. He had read the book. He knew the material. He flipped to a random page, looked at it, and spent the next few minutes in genuine silence because he could not do it. He could not find a single page that was not, at its core, a method for appearing to be something you had not actually built. Every line is designed to appear confident rather than be confident. Every tactic is designed to seem like a man with options rather than be a man with options. Every technique is designed to project a particular kind of masculine authority rather than earn it through actual living. It is the toilet paper bicep. You are trying to look impressive with padding, and it might work for a minute. But the moment any real pressure is applied, the moment she gets close enough to actually see, the moment the relationship moves beyond performance and requires something authentic, the paper compresses, and what's underneath is just an arm that didn't do the work. This is not a condemnation of everyone who has ever read a pickup book. Most of us start there. It is the logical place to start when you feel like you are missing something, and there are people who claim they have the answers. The problem is that the answers are the wrong kind. They are the decorator crab answers. A decorator crab is a crustacean that attaches things to its shell, sea, anemones, algae, shells of other creatures to disguise what it is. It looks extraordinary from a distance. Get close enough, and it is still just a crab with borrowed decoration. And here is the hard truth about decoration. Women can tell, not always consciously, not always immediately, but in that diffuse below-language way that the nervous system processes social information, the same mechanism that lets you feel when a room has shifted, even when no one has said anything, they detect it. The man who has built the substance and the man who has borrowed the decoration feel completely different in a room, in a conversation, in the quiet spaces between words. One of them radiates, the other one performs. And performance requires an audience that isn't paying close enough attention to see the effort. The tactics are not wrong because they are deceptive. They are wrong because they are backwards. They are attempting to produce the symptoms of a man who has his life together without first having the life together. Discipline creates a certain kind of presence. Purpose creates a certain kind of gravity. Standards create a certain kind of self-respect that is visible in every gesture. When you have built these things, some of the behaviors the pickup books describe emerge naturally. You are not performing with confidence. You are confident. There is nothing to perform. The best piece of dating advice is this: handle your life separately. Have your own world. Have your own direction. Always, always be more okay with not having sex than she is, not as a tactic. As a truth, as a lived reality. The man who genuinely does not need this particular outcome is operating on a completely different level than the man who is pretending not to need it, and every woman can tell the difference. The blind spot that costs you everything. Now here is the part that nobody talks about: the dark side of connection, the danger that lives inside chemistry itself. When you sit across from someone and the conversation flows, and they laugh at the right moments, and they seem to understand you in ways that feel rare, and your nervous system starts sending up the little fireworks of, this person is special, something happens in your brain that you need to know about. Your brain, without your permission, begins trusting them. Not because they have earned trust, because you like them. And in the mammalian nervous system, I like this person, and I trust this person, run through nearly the same channels. It is an ancient shortcut. In an ancestral environment, the people you liked were your tribe, and your tribe was safe, so liking someone was a reasonable proxy for trusting them. In the modern dating landscape, this shortcut will occasionally walk you directly off a cliff. What actually happens is this: someone skilled at creating the appearance of connection pulls you in by becoming what you need. They read you sometimes consciously, sometimes instinctively, and they transform into the version of themselves that you find most compelling. They say the right things about their past. They have the right vulnerabilities. They understand your particular flavor of loneliness better than anyone you have ever met, which feels like a miracle, and is in fact a skill, not always malicious, sometimes simply adaptive, but the result is the same. You develop a cognitive blind spot. The very intensity of the connection you feel begins working against your ability to accurately see the person creating it. Your brain has decided it likes them, which means it has simultaneously decided to downweight the signals that might complicate that assessment, the way they spoke about their ex that one time. The small inconsistency in the story they told, the moment they said something that didn't quite land right and you moved past it quickly because the rest of the evening was so good. This is not stupidity. This is the mechanism of connection working exactly as designed, and it is worth understanding for two reasons. First, because knowing it exists allows you to periodically step back, even when the connection feels overwhelming, and ask yourself the three questions. Not as a way of being cold or suspicious, but as a way of remaining a person who sees clearly even when feeling deeply. These are not mutually exclusive. You can be moved by someone and still look at them honestly. Second, because understanding this blind spot also makes you a more trustworthy person to be around. When you are aware of how quickly "I like this person" can become "I trust this person" in someone else's mind, you become careful with the power that creates. You do not perform connection. You build it slowly. You let people earn their way closer. And paradoxically, this restraint, this refusal to rush or perform, is itself deeply attractive. Because it signals that what they are eventually getting is real. The man who is in full control of himself, who cannot be swept away by the tide of chemistry and early dopamine hits and the seductive novelty of someone new that man is capable of something the other kind cannot offer. Genuine presence, genuine safety, the security of knowing that the person beside you is there because they chose to be, with full awareness, not because they got swept up. What Eduardo actually had. Let us go back to Eduardo one more time, because by now we have enough information to decode him properly. He was not handsome enough to coast on looks. He was not running lines. He was not doing the thing where you wait for her to finish speaking so you can say your next prepared thing. He had none of the surface-level equipment that men typically rely on. What he had was this. He was not thinking about himself at all. When he stood with a woman, his attention was completely on her. Not as a technique, not as a strategy, because he was genuinely curious. He was genuinely present. His self-esteem was not residing in this interaction, waiting to be confirmed or denied. It was already sorted. He had already answered the question of whether he was good enough, and the answer lived inside him, not in her response, which freed him to simply be there. That is the thing, that absence of self-focus, that room that opens up inside a conversation when you are not busy calculating yourself. She walks into that room, and it feels like space, like oxygen, like someone is actually home. And in a world of men who are all essentially doing some version of the same calculation, does she like me? Am I coming across right? What do I say next? Someone who is simply there, without any of that machinery running, is extraordinary. Self-awareness is how you get there. Not self-consciousness, which is self-awareness gone wrong, turned inward and anxious. Self-awareness. The ability to see yourself from a slight distance, to know how you come across, to understand what you are bringing into a room before you bring it. The anti-seductive man has none of this. He enters life and offends people and puzzles over why. He bragged without realizing he was bragging. He explained without noticing the eyes glazing over. He performed without knowing he was performing. The seductive man has looked in the mirror, not obsessively, not anxiously, but with enough honesty to know what he is not, and what work remains to be done. He is still growing. He is not pretending to have arrived somewhere he hasn't, and that honesty about himself creates the capacity for honesty with the person in front of him. And this is where it all converges. The listening, the questions, the absence of tactics, the rejection of performance. The willingness to be genuinely, slightly embarrassingly present with someone, including asking about farts in the middle of an otherwise perfectly serious conversation. All of it points to the same thing. The most attractive quality you can possess is not a behavior. It is a state. The state of a man who is genuinely interested in the world, genuinely interested in the people in it, genuinely at peace with himself, and therefore free to direct his energy outward. A man who has handled his interior life, who does not need validation from this particular interaction to confirm his worth, who can sit in silence without it becoming strange, because he is actually comfortable in his own presence. You cannot buy that. You cannot read that in a book. You cannot memorize it in a bathroom mirror. It is built, slowly, over years. Through honest self-examination, through real experience, through the willingness to be wrong and to learn from it, rather than blame it on everyone else. What you are actually looking for. Let me close with something that flips the frame entirely. Everything we have talked about today has been about becoming someone worth knowing, someone who listens, someone who sees, someone who has built enough of a real interior life that they don't need to borrow from other people's shells to seem impressive. But here is the other side of it, the part that matters just as much. You are also looking for someone real. The questions, who's fake in this room? Do you fart? What did you learn about yourself? They are not just attractive to ask, they are necessary. Because the thing that will ruin you faster than any bad habit or wrong tactic is spending years of your life close to someone who is not actually there. Someone comfortable enough with artificiality that they have built their identity inside it. Someone whose growth has been consistently outward-facing, whose lessons from every hard chapter in their life were always about other people's failures, never their own. The moment you feel that overwhelming sense of connection, that rare and beautiful pull that makes you think, this person gets me, that is exactly the moment to stay clear-headed, not cold, not suspicious, clear, because connection is not the destination. It is the beginning of the investigation. The most dangerous part of seduction, as Robert Greene would tell you, is not attraction. It is the blind spot that comes after. The moment your brain decides it likes someone and stops looking clearly, real seduction, the kind worth having, the kind that sustains, the kind that builds something rather than burns through it, requires both people to be genuinely present, which means genuinely themselves, which means genuinely doing the work of being worth knowing. Eduardo at the hotel wasn't charming because he had mastered a set of techniques. He was charming because he had done something much rarer and much harder. He had become genuinely interested in the world and genuinely comfortable in himself. And those two things together produce a gravity that no tactic can replicate and no performance can sustain. Stop trying to impress. Start trying to understand. Stop performing confidence. Start building the things that produce it. Stop looking for the line that works. Start becoming the person for whom the line is unnecessary. That is the whole lesson. Everything else is toilet paper. And if you remember one thing from today, carry it with you into every conversation, every first meeting, every moment when you are tempted to calculate instead of connect. Remember this. The most powerful thing you can say to someone is not a line. It is simply, I was listening. I remembered. You mattered enough to stay with me. That is what Eduardo had. That is what the hotel models responded to. That is what people are starving for in a world that has never been louder and never been less present. Be the exception. It is not as complicated as the books made it sound, but it is considerably more demanding, and it is worth every bit of that demand. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.